Hi, my name's John, and I'm being filmed by my son Andrew. I am restoring a 1929 Packard 7-passenger sedan. There's the body, and this is the engine mostly restored. I'm going to do a video today on how to double dome rivets. Come on over here. I'm also going to order my son around. So the shock arms on this car came from the factory with double domed rivets, domed on each side. This is one that I've restored, and it's been powder coated, and you can see that the rivets are all double domed. This had to come apart because it has an oil groove down the middle, and it had to be cleaned out for the lubrication system to work. So I had to grind the old rivets out and put new ones in. And no one told me how to double dome rivets. I had to learn this on my own. That's why I'm making this video, so that anybody out there who wants to double dome rivets will know how. So this is a rear shock, completely restored, ready to go back on the car. Front shock, I just finished doing the rivets on this one, so I took it all apart, bead blasted the whole thing, cleaned it out, it's all ready to go back together, and these are the new rivets. Like I said, no one told me how to do this. So here's the last shock, and 2 more rivets have to go in. So what I did is I bought rivets from Hanson Rivet Supply, and the all-important piece is this tool. They call this their hand rivet clincher. It's basically a hardened steel post, and then this little clincher tool slips into the post. Okay, and that one's mounted on a base. What they won't tell you is that with a common steel rivet, you can sandwich the rivet between 2 identical clincher heads, and you will get that double doming. The guys at Hanson are hesitant to say that because if you screw it up, you'll blame them. Lots of trial and error, but I figured out how to make it work. I had to make a custom piece for this rivet clincher head to sit on this steel jig, and I'll show you how this all goes together in a minute. Made that piece on my cheap shop lathe, which worked beautifully. So the trick is you can't put these things in a vise because you're going to be beating on them with a hammer, and it rattles everything to pieces. So I'm going to go kind of step by step and show you what I created to hold these things in place. It's basically a piece of 1-inch steel that I picked up at a steel place. So the first thing you do after you've got it all cleaned up is you take one of your rivets, and Hanson doesn't sell a 1/4-inch domed rivet. Ironically, they do sell a 1/4-inch rivet clincher, but they only sell a 3/16-inch domed. This is just a plain steel rivet. It's not stainless, it's not carbide, just plain old steel. So I had to lathe these heads down to a 1/4-inch. Okay? So the first thing you do, you put a rivet in the hole, and it should fit tight. Oops. I learned a little bit from old guys, and they said rivets should not be loose in the hole. They should be snug. Okay, so that's snug. So there's the rivet sitting in place. Now there's going to be a little bit of a gap here on this, just because this is the way they came from the factory. They don't have to be super tight. So the next thing you do is when you've got your rivet placed, you have to put it in this jig, and this is where this device comes in. So again, the idea is that you're going to sandwich this rivet in between these 2 clincher heads. So the way I set this up is one of the clincher heads will sit there like that in this jig, and the other I will beat on when I get it in place. Now, here's the trick. You've got to have this all lined up in this jig. This was by experimentation that I created this thing. So you're not going to find one on a website, but it's literally just hunks of scrap steel in my shop that I created to hold this thing in place while I beat this rivet. So you're going to see me futzing around a little bit because I know exactly, I've done something like 50 of these, so I know exactly how this has to go. And this is where the trial and error part comes in. When I get it all set up here in a second, I'll show you what has to be lined up. And because you're going to wind up hitting this thing with a fairly big hammer before you're done, it's all got to be really tight. This is where a lot of the trial and error comes in. I'm down to the last 2 rivets that I need to clinch, so I made a lot of mistakes, and you undoubtedly will too, but if you just keep playing with it, you'll get it. Okay, now I know that this is fairly well lined up, so I'll show you my final checks before I start pounding on this rivet head. Okay, so looking from the underneath, you want that clincher fairly straight. I check it from this side and from this side to see that it's actually on that rivet head. And you can see that clincher is sitting against that rivet head. Then I make sure all these bolts are all tight, so this thing is sitting down on it tight. Okay, now that looks really good, but you can see that there's still a little crack between those 2 halves of the plate, and I don't want that. So I take a garden variety C-clamp and I tighten it down. Now, when we look at it, those 2 plates are pretty much touching. Okay? So this rivet is now ready to get beat on. And I'll share some knowledge from an old guy that taught me about rivets. It's not the head of a rivet that creates the hold down. It's the shaft of the rivet. It needs to be what they call set. In other words, the long part of the rivet has to expand out against the hole. That's why rivets have to be tight in the hole. So to set a rivet, I'm going to hit this 3 times with a big old hammer. This is just a 2-pound maul. Not to completely bring it down, but to fatten it. So if we look at the rivet right now, it's I think it's a 3/16 inch diameter. Then I'm going to hit it, so it's going to be noisy. Now, if we zoom back in on that rivet, it's a little bit fatter. So what I've done is by gently tapping that, I've clinched, it's called clinching a rivet. Okay? So that rivet is clinched. Now, if you look at it, it's about 1/8 of an inch up from that edge. What I've learned through trial and error is that I got to take a little bit off the top of that rivet. The other thing is, you never heat a rivet. A cold rivet is to be hit with a hammer, not to be heated and molded. This is going to be a little noisy. I'm going to just take about 1/8 of an inch using a carbide grinder off the top of that rivet. Okay, so now we check it again. That rivet's almost flush with the top of that edge. Here's the other thing. If this moves at all while you're beating on it, stop and reposition, okay? So I like to check that. That's nice and solid. Now, I'm going to do what's called shaping the rivet head. Before I make it a nice round dome like this one here, I'm going to just tap it with a punch. This is just plain old punch, and kind of around those edges. Okay. So now that rivet is slowly coming into the shape that it's going to be. Why don't you get an angle straight down on the top of it so they can see it. There you go. So that I've just kind of dimpled the edges of that rivet. Okay. So now let's go ahead and zoom. I'm going to take this clinching tool on this thing I bought, and I'm going to hit it, a little ball peen hammer, and I'm going to hit it once at a time, and every time I hit it, you'll notice that that flat part on the top gets slightly smaller. Go ahead and zoom in from this straight down. Okay, so I hit it once, and you can see what I've done. I've sort of smoothed out those angles. Hit it again, and it's a little bit smaller. Okay? Now, the other thing I learned by trial and error is hit it once and then look at it. Because if you just keep hitting it, invariably the recoil is going to knock this thing off, and you're going to wind up hitting somewhere else. Don't ask me how I know that. So I hit it once, and I take a look at it, and it's coming down. It's slowly starting to dome. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to hit a little bit harder. And each time I hit it, that flat part on the top of the rivet is getting smaller and the edges are mushrooming down. Okay, we're almost done here. Now, I'm going to switch back to that big 2-pound maul using the same clincher, and I'm going to hit it a few more times. Word of advice, don't miss and hit your fingers. It really hurts. Don't ask me how I know that. Now, what you'll notice, zoom in from the top straight down, is that that little flat part is really starting to disappear. That means we're a couple of swings from being done. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that, except for on the sides, it's still kind of mushroomed out. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to cut in at a slight angle with this thing to put more force on the sides of that rivet head. Okay, why don't you go ahead and take one more look at it from the top. So now you can see that flat part's completely gone, and that's effectively flat and double domed. So I'm going to take the whole thing apart now. And there's the rivet we just finished. There's the side we shaped. And there's the other side. That is how, at least as far as I know, that's how you double dome a cold steel rivet.